Good evening and welcome to City of Glendale's Civil Service Commission meeting, December 11, 2013. May I please have roll call?
Commissioner Yakubian?
Here.
Commissioner Devine?
Here.
Commissioner Hatamian?
Here.
Commissioner Manukian?
Here.
And Chair Kazarian.
Here. Next item, please.
Minutes.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve, dispense from reading.
Second.
Unanimous consent. Next item, please.
Oral communications.
I see no cards and no one approaching the podium. Before we take the next item, I'd like to yield to the suggestion made to me by a colleague here and ask that we take item number, let me see, I think it's item number 10 out of order.
Is that Treasury?
Is that acceptable?
Yeah.
Yes? May we, please? Thank you.
Sure. You want to right now? Sure.
Please.
Item number 10, class specification for approval, Treasury and Investments Services Series.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. This item is the establishment of a new job series in the Treasury Department called Treasury and Investment Services Series. This is, as you know, a small department, but a very key department within the city structure. What this change will do is create, as far as the classifications utilized in the department, basically reorganizing the non-managerial staff within that department and creating a series of specialized classifications focusing exclusively on Treasury services. Right now, the office is staffed with what I would call generic clerical type positions, office service specialist ones, senior office service specialists, things like that. What we found is that this operation is pretty unique and pretty specialized. Not only the type of work that they perform, but the hours they serve. They're on a 540 program, a work schedule, whereas the rest of the city is on a 980. They have to keep up with the banking and investment services industry. So our hope was to address those factors within this new job series. The staff report also does mention the effect that the recent layoffs and bumping has had on this office in particular, where without getting into much detail, where if there's a layoff in one department, it can affect employees in another department. And for a variety of reasons, this department has just been inundated with bumping scenarios where people have been put into the department and there's been just a significant amount of turnover, and it's really affected the continuity of the staff. So what we hope to do with this is to, again, have a series that is specialized in nature and won't, hopefully not be subject to any further types of bumping layoff process. As you can see from the specification itself, at the very end you have an org chart which shows kind of the before and after with the similar functions and the four new classifications that are being proposed here: Treasury Services Technician 1 and 2, Treasury and Investment Services Operation Technician, and then the highest level is the Treasury and Investment Services Operations Specialist. Again, these are the classifications that we hope to slowly transition our existing staff to and hopefully provide some stability in this operation for the next few years. With that, I'll leave it to the Commission, and our City Treasurer, Rafi Manukian, is here, as is Rosie Akopian from my staff, who worked with the department on these.
Any questions?
Nope. I move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor? Unanimous consent. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Next item, please.
Recruitment and Examination Report.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a quick item just to lay out for the Commission all of the recruitments that are currently being undertaken. As you can see, it's a two-page spreadsheet with the recruitments listed at various stages by each of the members of my staff. And as you can see, things appear to be picking up a bit. There's a lot of recruitment going on. You see recruitments in the water and power area, community services and parks, community development, public works. Mr. Kwan has a whole series within the police department. And so, again, this is really a note and file item just to give you a general sense of what's occurring on the recruitment end. If you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. I think most of my staff is here to answer any questions as well. So,
Any questions? Seeing none, hearing none. Next item, please.
Eligible list established.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this too is a note and file item addressing the eligible lists that have been established since our last meeting. As you know, when a recruitment process is undertaken, there are various stages, different exams, interviews, various components to it. At the tail end, all those who succeed in that process end up being placed on an eligibility list for consideration of hire, both now and whenever those positions come up again. Since our last meeting, we've had 2 lists that have been established, one for Building Code Specialist 2, which was an open recruitment, and the other for wastewater maintenance trainee, which was a promotional position. Obviously, the open one had a much larger applicant pool, but ironically, both ended up with a medium-sized eligible list of 6 names. So, again, if you have any questions on this item or either of those 2 exams, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, this too is an open file.
Any questions? Hearing none. Thank you. Next item, please.
Presentation of Glendale Supervisory Academy and Glendale Leadership Academy Class of 2013.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is an item we like to bring back each year at about this time of the year, and it's the graduates from our 2 major management and supervisory curriculum programs that offer throughout the course of the calendar year. We have two programs that are applicable here. The first is the Glendale Supervisory Academy, which really it stretches from about January to November. It's a series of classes that are done in the areas of supervision, leadership, communication skills, customer service, performance evaluations, discipline, and we take the individuals and go through each of these classes, and then at the end of the year we recognize them with the plaque and the graduation ceremony. The other component is the Glendale Leadership Academy, which is it's about a 5 to 6 month program, which is done in conjunction with Woodbury University, and it's a little higher level. The leadership skills. The focus is more on leadership, communications, organizational change, resolving conflicts, and it's again, these are really outstanding programs. And again, we had 23 employees go through the Supervisory Academy and 23 go through the Leadership Academy. And it just so happens that today we had the graduation ceremony, and it was a great event, a lot of pride, a lot of happy folks. And as you can see, there's some pictures being shown right now of the graduates. And because this is such an important program to our department and to the organization and to career development, we always like to share it with the Commission and have some of the graduates attend and be recognized by the Commission. So at this point, I would ask anyone in the audience who was a graduate today to come on up and just come up to the podium. We promise we won't put you on the spot, other than maybe your name and department, that sort of thing. So.
Good evening, Commissioner. And I work for the and I truly do this program.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Good evening. I'm Darlene Sanchez. I'm in the Economic Development Division. I've been here for about 4 months, and what a wonderful way to get to know this wonderful city. Thanks.
Welcome.
We don't know her.
Good evening, Commissioners. Amy Martin, Human Resources Administrator. I oversee a lot of the training and development for the city, and it was an honor to finally be able to participate in the Leadership Academy. I really enjoyed learning a lot about my cohorts through this program.
Excellent.
Another person we
Another
have.
one.
Good evening, Commissioners. Manya Hunanian, Human Resources Administrator. I will echo what everybody else said so far. It was a really rewarding program. It was a great way to work with people that you don't get to work with on a daily basis.
You were an instructor at the program, I take it?
Not quite.
No?
No.
Okay. Just check.
Does this mean that now that you've graduated, you can take Matt's place next week?
Oh, Matt, how about that?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Emilio Perez, and I am with Fleet Services, going to 14 years now. And it was a pleasure being through this program, and I really enjoy and learn a lot.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
My name is Miroslav Lotsky. I'm a senior plant check engineer at Building and Safety, and this allows me to break the stigma of being a structural engineer. And,
Careful.
And I didn't realize that building relationships was going to be a major part of this, and I look forward to growing and serving. So I want to thank you very much, sincerely.
I would just like to know what the stigma is attached to structural engineers.
We love our engineers, by the way.
They don't realize that engineers are just as flexible and understanding
Thank you very
and
much.
humane, and we've got we all play the guitars, play games and videos. And
Thank you very much. I feel better.
See Commissioner Doyle afterwards. Commissioner Devine. I would like to take this opportunity to recognize our leader and supervisor for the evening from the City Attorney's Office, Doreen Martirosian. Welcome. I don't know what happened to the person that is generally here, but I'm delighted to see you, and I'm grateful for you filling in. Any other comments?
Yes, quick. I've shared this, Mr. Doyle, that one of the biggest assets that this city has are our employees, and from every department, and it comes from leadership, from the department heads, and you see it tonight. So we're very proud of you guys, and thank you for everything that you guys do.
Especially the structural engineer. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, permit specialist filming.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is we're back to our specifications for approval. This is a new classification. This is not a series. It's just one title. But the permit specialist filming, the filming permits has long been a function of our city clerk's office. And as I understand, the business has picked up quite a bit in the last few years. And like many other instances, we have a person in a very generic clerical position handling this function, and we're now to the point where this is more or less what that individual does full time, and it's gotten to be a little bit of an expertise in that particular area. So we are proposing this title, this classification, to address the permit specialist and the filming, and hopefully. In years to come, we can further enhance this function because it's really good for our community. It brings in revenue, and it's a very important program within the organization. We do have, didn't realize we had our two elected department heads here today. First, Mr. Manukian, and now we have Artie Kasakian here to answer any questions if you have any. And Ms. Kasparian worked with him on this specification. So,
Any questions? Yes.
I have a couple. Is this there a pay raise associated with this? Is this an upgrade to an existing position or reallocation with no pay increase?
A little bit of both. There will be a slight pay raise in the entirety of the steps, and Ms. Kasparian can expand upon that, but it won't be an increase in the overall city clerk's budget.
And is there someone sitting in the Office Service Specialist 2 position now that will automatically go into this new position, or will there be an open or promotional exam for it?
There will be a promotional exam for it.
Do you accept applications from realtors?
Everyone wants to get into Hollywood, I tell you.
No, that's the part.
That's all I have.
Everyone
That's
wants
all.
to show this.
Any other questions? No,
Move
go
to
ahead.
approve? Oh,
Did you want to say something?
No, we just appreciate the Civil Service Commission's support on this item. As Director Doyle mentioned, that we have had an uptick in filming here in the city over the course of the last years. For a long time, Glendale had a stigma associated as though we are not open to filming, but the studios now see us as a premier destination because of, from a realtor's perspective, the vast profile we have in terms of a downtown type setting. We have neighborhoods that can be any town, suburbia, America, to our own police station, which has had a recurring role on a number of very well-known television programs. It has seen more activity in the last few years as it sat vacant and then in a long time generating revenue for the city. So we need to make sure that this industry that is still the backbone of the economy here in this region stays here, and we want to make sure that we send that message clearly to the industry by having this position. So I thank you for your support.
and thank you, because I think one of the things that I noticed dramatically when you took over, I mean, this process, you can notice it within the community that the amount of filming, I mean, I can't even, from the perception, it has gone up substantially. So thank you for making that happen.
And it is a delicate, Commissioner Mnuchin, it is a delicate balance to keep the business here while also maintaining the quality of life, mitigating the impact it has on our residents and our businesses. For instance, in the downtown, as we enter now the shopping, we are deep in the thick of the busiest shopping season. We have a moratorium on filmings in the downtown area because we don't want our merchants impacted. But, it takes someone to coordinate all of this and to do it with a soft touch so the industry doesn't feel as though we're pushing them away. We are open for business. We want companies to come here and film here. We're within the 30-mile zone radius of the studios, so we want to continue that.
But please don't use the word moratorium. That's a scary word for a lot of people.
Well, especially, I'm sure.
It's a holiday break,
in the development
Ooh,
community.
chills going.
holiday vacation.
It is a loaded.
I'm just kidding. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, is the position revenue neutral based on the permit fees?
Yes, it is actually. We do well over, I'd say, at last count, we do about 270 to 280 permits a year. So that almost comes out to filming almost every day. And if you drive around the city, you'll notice there's various neighborhoods that are very popular for filming. And so that brings in every time we do. The permit fee is not really where we generate most of the funds. There's ancillary benefits to the city as these companies patronize our local businesses, but also the fees that come in for staff that's assigned to it, and as well as usage of city property.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Second.
In favor, everyone? Yes? Unanimous consent. Thank you very much. Next item, Mr. Doyle.
Class specification for approval, Community Service Officer, and Job Bulletin for approval, Community Service Officer General.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item is actually two individual items. The first being the revision of the job specification for Community Service Officer, otherwise known as the CSO classification, and then the second is the approval of an open job bulletin for the Community Service Officer General position. Community Service Officer is a non-sworn position in the police department. It's been around a long time. It handles a variety of ancillary tasks associated with law enforcement, except in the non-sworn capacity. In this classification, the CSO can be involved in 4 specific assignments. The first being a general position, the second being parking enforcement, the people who go around and write tickets. The third being assignment to jail, the custody bureau, and the fourth being the records bureau. What we're proposing to do with this particular specification change is to add a typing requirement for the community service officer general classification, a typing requirement of 30 words per minute. And I think we found that most of the assignments associated with the sort of the general CSO position do involve a lot of computer work and data entry and writing reports. Typically, they'll work in one of the crime bureaus or, community service where they're out, speaking to residents about crime prevention and things like that. So a 30-word per minute typing speed does seem appropriate. You'll note from the specification that the typing speed does vary depending on the assignment. I think jail has a lesser one, and parking enforcement I don't even think has a typing requirement. But nevertheless, that's the primary change with the specification. The second part of this, with the bulletin being requested, the last time the CSO general position was done on a recruitment, it was handled promotionally, and the department is requesting to do an open recruitment this time. And as you may recall, whenever we take a position that had previously been recruited for promotionally and make it open, we do bring it before the commission, and presumably if there's any concerns or objections raised by employees about that, they would bring them to you. So with that, those are the two items, and Mr. Kwan is here from my staff if you have any further questions. Also, Sergeant Meg Toto from the Police Department Professional Standards Bureau is here as well.
Mr. Kwan, please step forward. Commissioner Devine, it's all yours.
Just one quick question. In the classification under experience, it says no specific requirement, and in the bulletin, it requires 1 year. So I was wondering why there's a discrepancy there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, the requirement that, well, actually, the experience listing on the job bulletin is actually a desirable qualification. So in the event that we do get a high number of applications, which we do anticipate for this particular recruitment as it is an entry-level position, we can use a desirable qualification to establish who would be considered our most qualified applicants. So it's a dividing line per se.
So is the answer that they do not necessarily have to have 1 year of experience?
That's correct.
Okay.
I just find it kind of misleading. I'm not sure whether it could be worded a little differently so that, but anyway, I'll let my colleagues, if they have any further comment on that.
Mr. Chair, it's a desirable qualification only, and so we wouldn't necessarily use it to screen out unless we end up with 1,000 applicants and we have individuals with no related office experience up against those who would have more of that. You might have the pizza delivery men, people like that applying for this job. If we end up in a situation like that, we would probably give a preference to somebody who's worked in an operation where they've had to do writing and reports and things like that.
Okay. I understand that, and I have no problem with that. That's certainly up to the hiring department. But just for continuity, I would suggest that we change the experience requirement under the job classification to, or the job spec, to the same thing that's listed here on the job bulletin, so they're consistent.
So the spec and the...
So that under
Yeah, it should
experience
match.
for the job spec,
Yeah.
which we're approving, is the same as the experience, desirable 1 year, et cetera. So they're just consistent.
Absolutely.
That's all my suggestion is.
Okay.
Is that possible to be done?
We can add the desirable qualification to the job specification if that's the direction, yes.
I do see that it says no specific requirement.
Correct.
That's the spec, correct? And then the follow-up, which is referred to as what? Is this a...
The bulletin.
The bulletin. The bulletin says, where was it? There it is. 1 year, et cetera, is desirable. So I understand that it is not inconsistent, but it may be a bit not misleading, but rather unclear. One will look at this and then look at the other one. So either
Match it.
either match it, and the best way to match it is to say no specific requirement, however, or however way you want to put it, 1 year clerical experience, etc., is desirable. I don't know.
But both documents should match.
Yeah.
I think that's what they're trying to say.
Mr. Chair, I mean, the only concern I would have with this is this is it is a tried and true entry-level position, and I'd like it to stay that way. Now, I suppose we could still have a desirable qualification and yet maintain the entry-level status, because it's the entry-level status is important for a number of reasons. One, it makes this position or any position that's deemed entry-level eligible for veterans credit. It also, would enable us to more easily post this as an open recruitment as opposed to promotional recruitment. So I want to keep it as an entry-level classification. It's just what happens is, depending on the economy, depending on the particular assignment, we may get large numbers of candidates versus smaller numbers. And when we do get in those situations where we end up with 1,000 candidates, it does sometimes help to have a desirable qualification on that particular bulletin to help us screen it down a little bit. So that's all.
Go ahead.
I think I understand that, and I'm sure my colleagues do. All we're saying is, and we don't care whether you say put in the desirable or non-desirable or whatever, we just want it consistent. If you have a class
And I have
say one thing, have the bulletin say the other. And I personally don't care which way you go on it, as long as they both say the same thing, for clarity.
I have a suggestion. The spec says no specific requirement. The bulletin, under experience,
Right.
if it was to lead off by saying no specific requirement, period, and then continue on, 1 year recent and responsible clerical experience is desirable, then you have a consistency, but a more descriptiveness in the bulletin.
For this bulletin.
Yeah, so if I may propose, if my colleagues would agree, that under the bulletin, under experience, the 3 words be the words that it begins with, the short sentence, no specific experience, period, and then continue on with what's there.
I move to approve exactly what you said.
I second.
Okay, thank you. Everybody
Mr.
agrees?
Kwan, it's all your
Is
fault.
that okay, Mr. Doyle?
Sure.
Would that work?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Kwan,
You're going to pay for this.
thank you. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, utility risk manager.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a new managerial classification within GWP. Risk management in the utility business is a little different than risk management in the traditional sense. This function has mostly to do with oversight of some of the functions, the prime functions that occur within a utility, such as energy marketing, trading, power supply, rate policies, billing controls. It's all very, very specialized and complex stuff. We've tried filling this position once before, and the staff report mentions that this position we had previously filled as an assistant general manager overseeing both finance and risk management. And I think we found that doing it that way, having those dual functions, didn't allow the individual much time to address the risk management. So what we're proposing is just to have a specific title, utility risk manager, and again, this is the descriptions for that, and hopefully this will enable the individual hired to have that appropriate focus on risk. We have Steve Zern, General Manager for Water and Power here, along with Rosie Akopian from my staff who helped work on this specification, if you have questions.
You concluded your presentation?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
I just want to get a clarification on a few things. In the last sentence of the second paragraph, where you say previously this function was combined with the financial management oversight of the utility, which unfortunately did not allow for the necessary focus on risk. I wonder if you could explain a little bit more in detail what that means.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Member Devine. First and foremost, we need to clarify that the finance function was split from the utility about 2 years ago. So it formerly resided in the utility, specific to the utility, and reported to the general manager. That was split out when the former finance assistant general manager left the city. The finance function went to the finance department. So our finance director became the finance oversight for the utility, working with the general manager and the staff. So that actually split the function right there. So the trading function still stays within Water and Power and needs to have that risk management oversight. I don't believe one person who does both finance and risk management with an emphasis on finance in their background is best suited to manage the trading operation and some of the risk components that we think are very, very necessary. The trading operation in Water and Power is about 50% of the budget. It's about $140 million a year. Buying and selling electricity and gas to produce electricity. So it's a big ticket item. I didn't feel comfortable when I came to the utility that we didn't have somebody performing that function in a true risk management capacity. Every other utility, public or investor-owned, has this function. In many cases has a whole office that performs this function for the utility. So this was one of my first goals when I became the general manager, was to add this position and ensure that our trading operation was solid and that we weren't getting ourselves into precarious situations, and making sure that we were very conservative in our trading operation and make sure we were delivering the lowest cost energy possible to our customers.
More questions?
Yes, I have questions, but go ahead.
Okay. Is this going to be a promotional or open exam, or is there somebody that's in the position that's going to get reallocated?
Mr. Devine, this would be an open. We do not have anybody on staff now that meets these qualifications.
Okay. And the last question, I was trying to figure out where the position fits into the org chart, whether it's a line or a staff position. On one org chart, you show it's a staff position, risk management, coming off of the general manager. And on the more detailed org chart, I may have missed it, but I don't even see it on there. So if you could kind of enlighten me as to where that position fits into your organization, who it reports to, et cetera.
The risk manager, Mr. Devine, reports directly to me. He does not manage anybody else. We try to keep it as an independent position so that it remains strictly in a line to me and to, if you will, in org chart vernacular, the dotted line to the finance director as well. This way that this is not a person who manages the trading operations, not a person who manages any of our electrical or other power supply operations. So it reports directly to me, has no other staff under that position.
Okay. So I don't know if you have a copy of the report. Maybe Rosie does, but on the second org chart, I'm just trying to find out where that person is on here.
Oh, Mr. Devine, I'm sorry. This is an old org chart. This is the previous org chart. Before we added the position and before I kind of tightened things up.
Then can I assume that the org chart that
Page one.
precedes that?
Page 1 is the
Page one, where you show the risk management as a staff position coming off of directly under you, is that the current way it's going to be now?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So we can disregard page 2.
That just shows you what the previous structure was.
But it used to be.
Yeah,
Very well.
This is the new structure on page
Very
1.
well.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
That's all you have? Any other questions? I have a question. On the description of utility risk manager, page 3 of 4, the bottom of page 3 speaks of the experience requirement, I would think. Yes? It says 8 years of progressively responsible professional experience in energy risk management, comma, finance, comma, accounting or business, comma, including 4 years in a managerial capacity. Is this a requirement? This part.
Yes.
And then what follows, experience in a public or investor-owned utility is desirable. That's a desirable
Correct.
requirement, but not really a requirement.
Correct.
May I ask if you wouldn't terribly mind that at the end of that first full sentence, the words "is required" be placed so that I don't look at this and go, oh, all that experience is desirable, even though I think it isn't. I think experience in the public or investor-owned utility is desirable, but everything else above it, the 8 years, is a requirement. So, so someone with 7 years would not meet that requirement, right?
Correct.
If the sentence was to read exactly as it is written, rather than with a period where it says capacity, but continue and say in a managerial capacity is required, I think it would be, it would leave no doubt in anyone's mind. If
Perfectly fine
that's,
with that.
is that okay?
Yes, Mr. Chair, perfectly.
All right.
Move to approve with exactly what you said.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item, please.
Public hearing, resolution for entrance level classifications.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, you're about to vote on 3 separate resolutions having to do with the Commission's authority to update resolutions on entry-level, the determination of entry-level classifications. The second one involves the determination of classifications with a 12-month probationary period as opposed to 6 months. And the third has to do with unclassified hourly positions. We bring these to you every couple of years, just to really to update the respective lists. Mainly, what we try to do is when there are new classifications, new job titles added, or conversely those that are deleted, we would include those on these lists and make sure that they're in the appropriate category. So really the first one deals with something we were just talking about a few moments ago, and the declaration of these classifications that are entrance level or entry level classifications. And as I was saying earlier, it's important that this designation be made not only because the rules say that it's your responsibility to make that determination, but it's important to point these out for 2 reasons. Number one, the civil service rules do provide for what's known as veterans credit for individuals who are returning from military service. If they meet the requirements within a period of time from their discharge from the armed services, they can get additional points in our examination processes. And those points are awarded really only for entry-level type positions. So from that standpoint, it's important to clearly define which positions fall into the category. And the second has to do with under the rules determining what positions would be eligible for open examination processes. In most cases, there's sort of a bias or favored category towards those that are promotional, according to the rules and according to the charter. But for entry-level positions, it's generally understood that we can make those open, because really, presumably, there's nothing below it for someone to promote into. So the list you see on the resolution itself are those that we would determine to be entry level. It's more or less constant, although we did add one new classification, this Buyer 1, to the list. But for the most part, that's what we're asking of the Commission to, again, open the public hearing and vote on this and then close it. So with that, I believe it would be appropriate to consider the first of these 3. So.
Any questions?
I don't have a question. I'm ready to make a motion that we approve.
I think Correct me if I'm wrong, he needs to open the public hearing and then close it.
Oh.
that is correct.
This is the public hearing?
Yes.
Now, here and now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I declare the public hearing open. How's that?
And now you could close it.
Seeing no member of the public approaching this commission, I close the public hearing. Motion?
Motion to approve.
Second. All those in favor, unanimous consent appears to be the case in this matter.
And
Thank
the
you.
next two items
Next item.
are all the same.
Will I open the, yes, I now open the public hearing for the 12-month probationary period classifications.
Correct.
Seeing no one approaching this commission, I close the public hearing. Motion?
I will make a motion.
I will second.
Unanimous consent. Thank you. Now is the time for the public hearing for unclassified hourly part-time classifications and positions. No one before this commission appearing. I close the public hearing.
And I make a motion to approve it.
I second the motion.
Unanimous consent. Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Thank you, everyone. Next item, please.
Human Resources Activity Report, Human Resources Activity Report. Oh,
No,
I'm
we're-
sorry, my mistake. Public hearing, amendment to Civil Service Rules and Regulations, similar qualification and lower qualifications transfers.
More public hearings, Mr. Doyle?
One more public hearing. This involves a fairly important matter, amendment to your rules, and this is something that the Commission has brought to my attention. There appears to be some consensus for addressing the issue of both similar qualification transfers and lower qualification transfers to no longer require the Commission approval for these two items. I think the Commission's been quite clear that if we have a circumstance where this is initiated by the employee wants it, the department wants it, the HR department is in concurrence with it, and the city manager's office approves of it, why does it need to come to the Commission? And again, if the Commission is comfortable with relinquishing this particular authority, we can go ahead and approve this amendment. As you can see from the proposed language, and there's actually two versions, but the intent of the proposed language is to simply no longer require these matters to be brought before the Civil Service Commission. What was included in your staff report was a very minor change, essentially on Rule 9, Section 2C4, we're basically just taking out the words Civil Service Commission and changing that to the city manager. I had a discussion with Commissioner Devine, who did come up with what I thought was some good ideas as far as making it a little more logical and having the language actually address what actually occurs in this process where it's initiated by the employee and it doesn't necessarily receive approval by the Director of Human Resources, but a determination by the Director of Human Resources. And the suggestions that Commissioner Devine put forth I thought were good ones. And so those have been brought in as an alternative for you to consider. Each of the commissioners has copies of it, and we have copies in the back of the room. But it pretty much says the same thing. So with that, if the Commission has questions, be happy to try and answer them. Upon your approval, I then would need to take this to the City Council, which we'll no doubt do in a consent agenda, and this change will be made.
Question?
Yeah, just a comment. I mean, this is something that for many years Commissioner Devine and I said that if the department, it starts with the employee. Employee requests it, department head okays it, you've seen it, you okay it. I think we're all in agreement that there's no point of bringing it in to us and just creating this additional layer. That's at least my opinion. And I've read Commissioner Devine's, and I would be ready to make a motion when the time comes.
Okay, I have a question, but anybody have any questions?
I actually do. I don't have as extensive of a background in these types of transfers, but I do have concerns on including, I don't have any issues with similar qualification transfers, but I do have concerns with respect to lower qualification transfers. So I have some reservations in approving this as it is.
No, I understand. But I think one clarification, this is only when the employee requests it.
I understand that, but I would be concerned with respect to the circumstances which give rise to the employee's request. I mean, that employee may have been pressured into doing that, or a number of other scenarios that I can imagine that would be potentially problematic in the long run.
Understandable.
Let me, I understand where Commissioner Yakubian may be concerned, and that kind of raises a question in my mind as to following. When an employee who is seeking a lower qualification transfer or deciding to seek such a lower qualification transfer for whatever reason, perhaps because he or she is being informed you're not meeting the standards here, you run the risk of being cut or not retained on a non-probationary basis once probationary period is over. If that employee looks at our civil service rules after proposed modification, I would venture to say that that employee would see no recourse before this commission for perhaps challenging or disagreeing with an assessment that would cause this employee now to have no other option other than to request a lower qualification or face the consequences of a disapproving evaluation, thus resulting in a de facto termination or some other form of end of services. That is a concern as brought out because we know that employees who are dissatisfied, there are many sections in the civil service rules that provide the employee an opportunity to seek this venue for redress. That one scenario that has just been articulated by Commissioner Yakubian seems to close the door on such a scenario if such a scenario was the genesis for such a request, if you will. A request, though, on its surface voluntary, but really voluntary only because there's no other options available to that person. What do you say to that, Mr. Doyle?
I'm not sure if that was a question or a very long comment.
I mean, I'm looking for input because I now have concerns based on what appears to be very well taken.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Yakubian's comments are very, very applicable, and I will say, in all honesty, some situations do occur where there are performance issues. Quite frankly,
right.
Could be someone who is on probation or someone who's off probation, and this process does enable an alternative for consideration where, again, everyone has to agree with this. It's the employee can initiate it. If the department head is okay with it, and we find that employee, and my role in this is not to say that this is appropriate, personnel move. My role is to look at the job they're in, the minimum requirements, the duties and such, and look at that person's background and the job they're moving to, and to see if that's an appropriate match. And that's how I give my approval. But I will say that probably 80% of these that occur are just the opposite. It's people who are in jobs that they really no longer like, or they don't want to be in, or they bit off too much, and it could be a promotion or something, and they decide, I'm miserable. I want to go back to a previous job, or I want less responsibility.
On the
And-
similar one, perhaps, but on the lower one, I seem to think that those who have appeared before us maybe were in the other 20%. That's the sense I got.
The lower ones, no, the lower one, it's the same. But that would be, like I said, 75, 80% of them. The other 25% are, in fact, those where the people are in a job that they, in most cases, they're struggling. They're having performance-related issues. And, you know, in lieu of them facing, you know, negative performance evaluations, possible demotion or possible, you know, removal from employment, they may decide, you know what, I see the writing on the wall. I'd like to pursue this other option, and you know, there's an opening at this level. I think I can handle that, and if everyone agrees to it, we've got a happy employee. A lot of these that you've seen in closed session, I won't mention any names, but you've seen a lot of police officers in their probationary year where, you know, for one reason or another, they either decide they can't do it, or they're facing such, you know, challenges in meeting the requirements of that job, and you know, we've moved numerous former police officers into positions in custody or other areas of the police department, and they're perfectly happy with that scenario. Now, whether they were, you know, pressured into that, that's, you know, generally not how we do business. But, you know, if somebody is, you know, being held accountable for meeting the essential functions of their job, and they're you know, they're offered an alternative, that, you know, in most cases it's generally a mutually beneficial move on that person's part.
I think that the time that this commission spends on these similar or lower qualifications is not so unduly burdensome upon this commission, at least in the opinion of this one commissioner, so that it calls for us to do away with this venue as a possible venue as the final stop for that request. Now, I know that my colleagues, at least two, have had a longer tenure here than I, and they perhaps, for good reason, see it differently. But I would be remiss in my duties if I did not take note of Commissioner Yakubian's concern, which I now share. I just want to say that.
Let me make one quick comment. First of all, no one is talking about taking away someone's civil service rights. None of that goes away. And the point, I think, that at least in my mind, is this qualification transfers, and we've seen a lot of these come up where, first of all, again, a lot of times these people either are probation, and it is the job itself, very similar to what you brought up with the police department. We've had many times that they've gone through the police academy, they've gone onto the field and have figured out that this is not what they thought in their mind that what the job was. So many times it happens that they either are going to quit or there's another opportunity that they initiate. That's where I think we had the same concerns that are being brought up. But once you start seeing these, you see that it's something that is initiated by the employee. That's where it all starts from, of the concern of, I understand the point of someone being given an option to either quit or an opportunity comes up. That's where, at least in my mind, it covers the point that is brought up.
The only thing is that in the case of that one individual, that one civil service employee who may have felt that he or she has no other choice but to seek this lower qualification transfer, will not have this final stop to come here and then say, you know what, I really am doing this because I've been given no choice. I disagree with this. It's really not my intent or voluntary. I don't know.
Well, let me have a couple of comments. One, I believe the concern that Ms. Yukubian brought up can be addressed by putting in an appeal paragraph in there where such an employee that feels coerced or forced into this lower qualification transfer has the right to appeal to the commission. And that would, I think, solve that. But going beyond that, the employee, if they put in the request and they're being coerced to do that, all they have to do is not sign the request form. And these four things have to happen before there's a transfer. So if the employee, in fact, feels he's being coerced or doesn't want to do the lower qualification, he doesn't sign it. And correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, if they're not signed by the employee, there is no transfer.
That's correct.
And then that employee would be facing the other alternatives, which would be a demotion or suspension or whatever is causing the person.
Or termination, they can appeal that.
They can appeal that, absolutely.
I do have one question, Matt. When the employees come to you or to their supervisors and they're wanting to voluntarily demote or go to a lower classification, are they given the opportunity to go speak to their union representatives to see whether or not there'll be any adverse effects in them doing so, or are they given a time period for them to go and maybe talk to a representative, whether it's an advocate, union rep, attorney, to see whether or not that's the right step for them to take, or is it done immediately right there and then within a span of a week?
Certainly, they're given time to consider this type of a move. In fact, it's something that I would expect any level-headed employee to go home, talk to spouse, family, and union rep, attorney, whoever. So I can't think of a scenario where someone is given an inadequate amount of time before making this decision.
The reason why I say this is because it would add another layer of protection if it becomes part of the process for the city to advise them that they have that right and allow some time. So put in some type of a procedure for them to have the time, and also advise them that they have the ability to go out there and speak to a union rep, especially when it's a disciplinary matter, because then you're tying in civil service rights. If it's a pending performance to standards issue where the employee for whatever reason didn't perform to standards and now we give them this option to voluntarily demote themselves, they would have had the right to take that pending discipline to the commission and see whether or not it was going to get sustained. They may have been able to keep their old higher position versus voluntarily demoting themselves in avoiding to go to civil service. But
that's already there.
Yeah, and it would, and I'm trying to highlight what Commissioner Devine was saying. If you have the appeals language, even after the fact, if they agree to a demotion, and then you give them another 10 days to file an appeal, if they choose to, again, adds another layer of protection for the city in giving the employee another opportunity to bring the voluntary demotion in front of the commission.
May I?
Yes, please.
I actually would like to follow up on something that Chair Gazarian said. Given the amount of time that we spend on this commission on this issue, I don't see the downside of having things be clear for both sides, once and for all. I remember a similar case that we had about a month ago, where we had this sort of a lower classification, a voluntary lower classification, and Chair Gazarian asked this gentleman if this was completely voluntary. He said yes. We were, assured that there were no issues, and, we moved on. I mean, what is the downside of having that security for both the city and for the employee, given the very little time that is spent on this matter?
It's not very little time. There's a lot of these.
Yeah.
We've done at least 15 of these this year. 23.
The question is, do we do it where it's automatic, or do we do it where the employee requests to come and see the commission? I think that would be the middle ground.
And there's one other point, you mentioned, and I agree that we spend very little time here. but if the commission recalls, the ones we did, I think it was the last meeting or the one before that, we had 2 or 3 of them. One of them was out in the hallway, and we approved it without even hearing them. I mean, it was a kangaroo court, quite frankly. It was a joke. And I think, and it was an embarrassment, as far as I was concerned.
I agree.
That we were sitting here, they hadn't even come in from the hallway, and we were ruling on it because it was automatic.
It was,
And you may get those, but it's just that 1 or 2 cases out of, let's say, 100 where, if the employee wants to be heard in front of the Civil Service Commission and this...
If the employee wants to be heard in front of the Civil Service Commission, he refuses to sign the request for lower qualification transfer. Then the next step is taken by the department, which would be a demotion, a suspension, a firing, all of which are appealable offenses, and we would hear it at that time.
And I agree with you, and that's why I think if we are given the comfort, maybe with Commissioner Yakubian's concerns, or if we're given the comfort of knowing that that type of language exists and there is some type of a process where they are informed of that, then
we can put it on the
form. It could be on it could be on their choosing to come to the commission versus it's just an automatic process.
I would like to echo that. My personal preference, it's only me obviously, it would be to err on the side of caution, again, on that, random and perhaps unlikely circumstance. I would like to have as little barriers to arriving to this commission as possible, and for to eliminate the need to jump through these extra hoops. Again, I obviously have heard everyone here and respect everyone's opinion, but that's just where I stand.
And I agree with Commissioner Yakubian. I think the benefit to the civil service employee far outweighs the burden on this commission. That's my opinion.
Here's my recommendation. I'd like to make a motion that we approve it with the changes of adding the provision about the ability, if the employee wants to have it heard in front of us, they have that option on the form. Are you okay with that?
I second that.
Okay.
Matt, did you... I think Matt wants to...
Okay.
I don't know what that
I'm,
means.
Mr. Chair, I'm trying to understand.
I am too.
So the employee would put in a request to be transferred to another position, and they would have a box to check off. Either they would waive their ability to come before the commission, or they want to come before the commission.
There would be a provision there that says if the employee would like to have this heard in front of the Civil Service Commission as a reconfirmation, they have that option. They're not giving up anything as far as, at least I'm concerned, as far as their rights. All they would do, the same form that the department head signs, you sign, the employee signs, the section, there would be basically a provision that says the employee has the right to have this item come in front of the Civil Service Commission. I mean,
let me take a shot at it. If you're suggesting that item number, I'm going by the main agenda that was given, the package. I'm not going by this one piece paper that was given here somewhere as well. On the agenda, page 35, Mr. Doyle, it has item number 4. Approval of the city manager is being inserted in place of Civil Service Commission there, and it says if approved by the city manager as opposed to the Civil Service Commission. Perhaps there, if Commissioner Manukian's proposed modification is what I'm about to say, it would say that the employee may seek approval of this transfer by the Civil Service Commission if the employee so chooses. Otherwise, pending approval by city manager, the employee must successfully complete the prescribed probationary period for their new classification.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, that form did always have the city manager's section, or it didn't?
It did not.
Oh, it did not. Okay. So it's just a department.
Does that meet your concern? I know it's not exactly what what you had
Well-
in mind, neither did I, but
You know, I have no problem with that wording. I would like to suggest that we look at the revised one because it's more consistent.
That was intended for the revised one, by the way.
Pardon me?
The one that you had, the
Right.
one that has your
And-
comments
but
on it.
to put in, we have items 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the process, and this
Mm-hmm.
add number 5, which Ara has suggested, and I agree with it, that actually Commissioner Kazarian used the best wording on that, something that the employee has the ability, or Wardsley has the ability to be heard by the commission if he or she so chooses, something to that effect.
Yeah.
So there'd be one more item in the rule that the employee has the ability or the right or whatever.
The option
wording-
to.
the option. Maybe we can ask our attorney for some good wording there to put in there the option of having the
you want me to repeat
the
it?
request heard by the Civil Service Commission.
Sure. Commission Chair, Commission members, just for clarification, is this going to be an amendment to the proposed amendment by Commissioner Devine? Just so the
Yes.
record is completely clear.
Correct. That's exactly the case.
If the employee so chooses,
Oh, I like that.
if the employee so chooses, the employee may seek confirmation of the lower classification transfer by the Civil Service Commission.
We want to limit it to only the lower.
Similar and lower qualification transfer.
Well, I think
Yeah.
we were just talking
I think
about
we're
the
just talking
lower
about the lower.
qualification.
Oh, okay.
We were talking about lower,
Yeah.
and I'm comfortable with lower.
That was my motion. And seconded.
Is that okay?
Subject to those amendments that we just discussed, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have a completely separate
Are we
question.
going to take a roll call on this?
Oh, on this amendment? Yeah, but I'm not done to vote on this. I have another thing to ask.
Oh, okay.
Okay, on the same item?
Yes.
Okay, so
So let's hold that modification. I have a question, a clarification I need to ask. I need to be made. Section 3 on the handout, as well as page 35 of the package that was mailed to us, is the same. It talks about transfer authority of city manager. Why is that there? In terms of, I mean, why is that? That's not part of this.
No.
That was already part of the civil service rules.
That's correct.
Right,
That's an existing.
Continuation, basically, of the
Yeah,
rules?
Yeah,
Section
it's a
3.
continuation of the
Right.
section on
Yeah.
transfers,
Yeah.
but it's irrelevant to the subject
Because
matter.
because if it is part of it, then I was, yes, I understand that it doesn't restrict the authority of the city manager to temporarily transfer or assign employees, but then it almost begs insertion of, it also doesn't restrict the employees' rights to contest such transfers. So I'm going to leave it alone because it's really not part and parcel of our motion. It's part of the civil service rules as they are in that order.
It's actually
anyway.
part of the charter,
Right.
too.
Very well. And with that,
So-
I'm done. Can we vote on can we make a motion on
There's
the?
been a
we have
motion.
already made the motion. He seconded.
Oh,
We
very
need a
well.
roll call.
Roll call, yes.
Well, do we have to open up, you have to open up for public hearing now?
This was a public hearing matter?
Yes.
Oh, the public hearing, after all of this, the public hearing on the amendment to the Civil Service Rules and Regulations, similar qualifications and lower qualification transfers is now open. Seeing no one approaching this body, that public hearing is now closed.
And you had passed the bar? I want to see that next time.
I think that's a defamatory statement that is actionable. I will have my attorney contact you later.
Oh, God.
Roll call.
Can I retain your services?
Roll call. Commissioner Yakubian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Commissioner Hatamian?
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian?
Yes.
And Chair Gazarian?
Really wouldn't matter. We have 3 votes.
I will abstain. Thank you. You could take that to the state bar and say he abstained. Next item, please.
Human Resources Activity Report for the fiscal year 2012 to 2013.
Mr. Devine.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is our annual activity report. We bring this to you about this time each year, addressing a lot of facts, figures, and data that occurred during our previous fiscal year, that being the 2012-2013 fiscal year. In this report, you see a whole variety of data on recruitment, applicant services, examinations, labor relations issues, Civil Service Commission activity, hearings, employee turnover, and just a variety of interesting information. What we do is we utilize we list the current year's activities, and then we look at the previous years. So there's some basis of comparison. And, for the most part, they just try to see if there are any trends or anything of interest to the Commission. In this report, really what we tend to focus on a lot has to do with recruitment and the number of applications. And we did see quite an uptick in this past fiscal year on applications. And mostly that has to do with the types of recruitments we're doing. We did several full-fledged police officer recruit processes. We did a police communication operator, a fire communication operator, fire cadet. Each of these had hundreds of applicants put in. One other thing that occurred sort of at the tail end of the 11-12 fiscal year was we went to a fully automated application system where we no longer are utilizing the paper applications, and people can just apply online. And with that, I think the ease of applying for our jobs is naturally going to cause additional applications. Conversely, we are seeing probably a higher rate of no-show to our exams because it's so easy and convenient to apply. Actually, when the date of the written exam comes along, we're probably seeing less people, not less people, but a smaller percentage of people show up than in the old days. Other things to point out here is the turnover, particularly for that 12-13 fiscal year, went way high up from about 6.83% to 15.69%. This was largely due to that particular year. We had layoffs, we had a retirement incentive program, and just an elimination of a great number of positions. So as a result, it ended up increasing our turnover. As we begin, or as we're in the 13-14 fiscal year, I would anticipate our turnover leveling way down to probably 5-6%, which is the traditional experience that we've had. Again, there are all kinds of very interesting facts, figures, and statistics here. Do you have questions? If you want to pursue any of them further, we're prepared to do so. If not, this is a note and file item. And before we close on this item, I do want to commend a couple members of my staff. This is something that's overseen by Amy Martin, and we have a very hardworking staff member in Human Resources named Salpi Jagaspanian, who she's our certification specialist, and she deals with all of these transactions and really did the bulk of the work in compiling this data. So I want to thank those two. The Commission has questions. Be happy to try and answer them.
Any questions?
Yes, sir. I have a question. It's actually a recommendation. One of the things that throughout the years I've noticed in the past year, there seemed, at least to my perception, there was a lot of people that during their probation period, when they do not pass the probation period, do you do an exit interview on that, or that doesn't fall under the exit? If somebody's, let's say, being let go because they didn't meet the requirements of their probation, when you have, there's an item in here that you have exit interviews, is that covered under there?
Generally, Commissioner Manukian, generally people being terminated or failing on probation are not given an exit interview.
And let me just clarify why I'm bringing that up. Sometimes it might be a good idea, at least, I'm not talking about determinations, mostly the people that do not make the probation period, that by talking to these individuals, you might get some input as far as why they failed. It's just an idea, because sometimes, especially there's a lot of different departments, and maybe they might have suggestions. It's something for you to consider. It was
Commissioner Mnuchin, it is a good idea. It's the type of feedback that can sometimes be helpful. And I've been around a long time. I do recall a point at which we did exit interviews with everyone, and obviously those people who are being let go involuntarily, it's a very awkward and contentious encounter, and I think the staff having to deal with that was quite difficult, and so I think a few years back we changed that procedure, but it is something we can consider. Even somebody who's not meeting the standards certainly may have some good, valid input, which I think we would take to heart. So your points are well taken.
Anything further? Next item, please.
Reports and information, past due employee performance evaluations.
Your voice changed.
Mr. Doyle. That's not going to save you, Mr. Kwan.
Looks like Mr. Kwan got a promotion.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is your regular monthly item on late performance evaluations. We have, looks like, 5 departments with no past due performance evaluations, which and the others either have first or second notices. Those 5 are City Treasurer's Office, Finance, Water and Power, which is one of our biggest, Police as well. And I'm sorry, looks like we have 6. No, it's 5. Police and Public Works. So somewhat ironic that some of our biggest, most complex departments have done a good job with keeping these in on time. So with that, it's a note and file. If you have any questions, be happy to try and answer them.
Questions? Thank you very much. Next item, please.
Agenda forecast.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, nothing really to add. Obviously, the December 25th meeting is not going to occur due to the holiday. Our next scheduled meeting is January the 8th, 2014. I'm not certain that we will have sufficient work for that particular meeting. A lot of people will be taking off around the New Year's, so we'll keep in touch with you on that and monitor what happens that come in. The only other thing that we have listed is certainly for the January 22nd, 2014 meeting. We have one report lined up to present. So.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Civil Service Commission staff comments.
Any comments?
Just wanted to wish everyone a happy holidays, since this is going to be our last meeting. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Next item, please. I think, is this where I always get confused here. Are we supposed to report out now before the closed section? Okay. But we don't report out right now.
Correct.
Okay.
Until after the closed session.
Okay. Next item, please.
Closed session. Public employee appointment, similar qualifications transfer, neighborhood services supervisor. Then public employee appointment, lower qualifications transfer, customer service utility representative. Then public employee discipline deliberations. And last item is public employee discipline.
We have 4 items then.
Correct.
Very well. Thank you. I think at this time I would ask that those who do not have business before the commission as to the first item.
That's correct. Item 19A involves a similar qualifications transfer involving neighborhood services, so everyone else in the audience should leave, and then we'll go to the next item. So.